The following is a paid presentation furnished by Rare Collectibles TV, LLC.
I'm Jack McNamara, coming to you from the National Military Park in Gettysburg. It was on this field that countless American soldiers laid down their lives in order to protect the liberty of their fellow countrymen during the Civil War. Stay tuned to find out how you can own a rare piece of authentic Gettysburg weaponry. Coming up next. Right now, we're in one of the most important cities in American history, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It was on Gettysburg battlefield over 150 years ago that the Union of the North and the Confederacy of the South came face to face in a head-on battle during the Civil War. During this battle, Union Major General George Meade's Army of the Potomac defended their ground against a relentless attack from Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. From July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, these two armies battled each other head-on for 3 days without rest. After numerous engagements across the battlefield, Robert E. Lee and his army were pushed back by George Meade's army and were forced to retreat. The victory by Meade and his army has now gone down in history as the most vital turning point of the American Civil War. Rare Collectibles TV recently had the unique opportunity to purchase a large private collection of authenticated weapons found on the Gettysburg battlefield. These are documented with an impeccable chain of custody. This collection, known as the J.T. Hayes Collection, has been handed down directly through the Hayes family and is recorded in the Emmitsburg, Maryland Historical Society records. The rare military artifacts that you're about to see were assembled in July of 1863, the same month in which the Battle of Gettysburg took place. Authentic military armaments from the Civil War are highly sought after by collectors due to their extremely limited availability. And anything found on the Gettysburg battlefield is an ultimate rarity. Many Civil War weapons were either destroyed or untraced or just lost to the dustbins of history. There were, however, a small number of muskets, bayonets, and revolvers that managed to be put away and saved. This is the amazing story of the J.T. Hayes Gettysburg Collection. Each of the weapons you're about to see today was used by soldiers at Gettysburg and serves as a valuable reminder of America's history and our enduring dedication to freedom. To speak more about the legendary J.T. Hayes Collection, I'd like to introduce antique firearms expert and renowned Militaria appraiser, Peter Karlan. With over 30 years' experience, Peter has certified Militaria from the most significant periods of American history, including the Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II, and of course, the Civil War. Each of the military relics that Peter shows today has been personally authenticated and certified by him. And now, here's Peter Karlan.
The American Civil War was fought between 1861 and 1865, between the South, which was the Confederacy, and the North, which was the Union. So Gettysburg is probably the most important battle during the Civil War. It was July 1st, 1863 through July 3rd, 1863, and it culminated with an enormous battle that took place for 3 days. For 3 days, the Union and Confederate forces produced some of the fiercest fighting. The Artillery Barrage was the largest to date in the Western Hemisphere. It was the high water mark of the Confederacy, meaning that it was the furthest north that the Southern troops pushed towards the northern capitals, towards Philadelphia and Washington and those important strategic areas. In fact, in the center of the battlefield is a large monument under a stand of trees. It marks the high water mark of the Confederacy. This was such a crucial part of the Civil War and such an important battle that if the Southern troops pushed north and won the Battle of Gettysburg, they could have taken Washington and Philadelphia. That could have turned the tide of the war. In the end, the Union was victorious, but the aftermath was a tragedy. Over 7,000 dead on both sides and 30,000 wounded was the cost that was paid. After Gettysburg, the war raged on for 2 more years, mostly in the South. Union forces continued their campaign, and finally, on April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Legend says that the Battle of Gettysburg could be heard from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, as far as 150 miles away. The surrounding towns must have wondered, what was the result of this terrifying event? Did the Union win? Did the Confederacy win? What happened and who won? Well, J.T. Hayes was a simple merchant in Emmitsburg, Maryland. He decided to get into his horse and wagon and travel about 10 miles up the road to Gettysburg. When he got there, I can't imagine what the shock in his face looked like. 7,000 dead, 30,000 wounded. The carnage was unbelievable. So it's actually documented in the Emmitsburg historical records that he buried bodies at Gettysburg. We don't know if he was pressed into service or volunteered, but regardless, he buried the dead at Gettysburg. Can you even imagine what that could have been like? And he did that for likely a few days. After he was finished with burial detail, he did what a lot of other people did at that time, which was gather souvenirs from the battlefield, loaded them into his wagon, and drove back down to Emmitsburg. This eventually is known as the Hayes Collection. That collection of artifacts stayed in his shop for decades to come. Now, this is what's really important about the Hayes Collection, that this is a documented collection of items that was actually picked up off of the battlefield and is chronicled in the Emmitsburg historical records and provided as an oral history by the direct descendant. Since July 1863, the Hayes family has preserved this collection of items, acting as caretakers and custodians of this important American history. It was passed down from generation to generation within the Hayes family. The collection was inherited by 2 brothers, Jim and John Hayes, direct descendants of J.T. Hayes. The Hayes Collection is one of the most historically significant collections that I have ever had the privilege to curate. So found in the collection is a number of different items that you would expect to see on a battlefield. There's muskets, pistols, and bayonets, and there's actually one very special sword. These are the weapons that the soldiers would have carried, or officers, and they are all in as-found condition. When you look at these items, they have the patina, they have the wear, they look like they're battle-worn weapons. We didn't try to clean them, we didn't try to preserve them, we just are presenting them exactly the way that they were found on the battlefield. So some of the most commonly used weapons during the Civil War were actually the musket, which was carried by just about every infantryman that was in service, a bayonet that would fix on that musket, a cap box, a shoulder box, or something to carry their ammunition. Officers typically used pistols and swords, but it's not uncommon for people to carry other things into the field, especially by the Southern troops. So the musket is probably the oldest kind of weapon that was used during the Civil War. Muskets were started basically in the 17th century, and it had a smooth bore, a round barrel, no rifling, so your ball would travel through the barrel and straight, but sometimes not that accurate. The rifle musket, on the other hand, had lands and grooves that were cut into the barrel, and this would cause the bullet to turn and travel straight up to 200 yards in cases. So the advent of rifling was a game changer in the world of firearms. This addition of lands and grooves in a barrel would enable the soldier to shoot more true and accurate at a greater range by using this new technology. So part of this collection includes a lot of different types of muskets. They're really representative of what would be found on a battlefield by both North and South. Some of them you can kind of look at and say, this was field altered, this was changed, and those ones kind of look like they probably could have been more used by Southern troops. And some of the muskets are really interesting that we found. One of them is a Lorenz musket, and a Lorenz musket is an Austrian manufactured musket. The Union and the Confederacy actually bought 300,000 of these muskets and imported them for use during the Civil War. And this one is very interesting because the article in the Emmitsburg Historical Society noted that J.T. Hayes picked up the muskets off the field with bayonets attached, right? So he brought them down to his stoveroom with the bayonets attached and hung them on the wall, and there they sat. Well, in going through the collection, I kind of looked at all the different bayonets and looked at all the different muskets there, and there was only one Lorenz musket, and there was only one Lorenz bayonet. So we know with certainty that these two musket and bayonet were together. So it's incredibly rare to have the original musket and the bayonet that was affixed to that musket during the Civil War intact and together. That's a really rare occurrence. So another musket that we found in the collection is an 1861 dated Enfield rifle. So the Enfield rifle was used both by the North and the South. They were imported by the South through the blockades, and a lot of those were marked with different markings. This one is a really interesting example. It shows very hard use. The stock is cut down, and it looks a lot like something a Southern soldier would have carried on the field. Another musket that was found on the field is a model 1816 musket that was converted by Remington Arms, and it has a Maynard tape primer system on it, which is kind of unusual. The more unusual thing about this musket is it's New Jersey marked, and there was only about, I believe, 5,000 of those that were made for the New Jersey troops prior to the Civil War. So this one, you have a very interesting conversion musket on its own, but then you have it that you can identify that it was issued to New Jersey troops, and then you can also identify that it was found at Gettysburg. Of course, the cavalry was a big deal at Gettysburg, and one of the guns that was found on the field is a third type Burnside cavalry carbine, and it's actually in pretty decent condition and presented in as-found condition. It's a nice, honest carbine, and it was just one of many that came in the collection.
These remarkable muskets are some of the most significant relics in American history. They were used to continue our never-ending fight for freedom during the American Civil War at the Battle of Gettysburg. To add one of these authentic muskets to your collection and view more items from the illustrious J.T. Hayes collection, go to rarecollectiblestv.com and click on the Militaria button at the top of the homepage to take you to the J.T. Hayes collection. Again, go to rarecollectiblestv.com. These museum-quality items from the Civil War, pedigreed to the Battle of Gettysburg, are just some of the very few to survive. These items won't last long. Just visit rarecollectiblestv.com. I'm here at the National Military Park of Gettysburg Battlefield. It was on this very field over 150 years ago that Union Major General George Meade's Army of the Potomac came face to face with Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. From July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, these two armies battled each other head-on for 3 days without rest. After numerous engagements across the battlefield, Robert E. Lee and his army were pushed back by George Meade's army and were forced to retreat. This victory by Meade and his army was a major turning point in the American Civil War. And now let's go back to Militaria expert Peter Karlan.
So as a dealer and a collector, I get a lot of calls just about every day of people wanting to sell stuff. And recently I received a call from a gentleman in Virginia named John Hayes. He told me the story about his great-grandfather who was at Gettysburg, and he had all of these guns and swords from the battlefield. I kind of took it with a grain of salt, rolled my eyes, said, yeah, everybody wants a Gettysburg relic, something authentic. And to be honest, in the field, we hear a lot of stories about Gettysburg, but most of them just don't pan out. So regardless, I went to look at the items. I drove up to Virginia and go see John Hayes and look at the collection. When I was there, he again described how these items came to him, that he was a direct descendant of J.T. Hayes, and J.T. Hayes gathered these items from the battlefield, and he inherited them through a direct chain of custody. And things started getting a little more interesting from there. And I looked at the items, and I looked at the quality of the items, and I looked at the wear of the items, and I looked at them and said, these look like battle-worn items. These look like items that would have been picked off a battlefield. So we came to terms. I bought the collection, and that's how we acquired the J.T. Hayes collection. After I got the collection back down to my house in North Carolina, I started doing more research. And I was researching J.T. Hayes, and I was shocked when I found an article that was written by William Hayes, who was the grandson of J.T. Hayes. And that article chronicled verbatim, in detail, the same exact story. Now, this is an excerpt that I'm going to read. It starts, "The story was that some days after the battle, my grandfather Hayes drove by horse and wagon to Gettysburg and came home with several muskets and bayonets attached, and the cannonballs. For some reason, the muskets were kept in what we called the stoveroom on the second floor of the shop. So this collection was passed down through the generations directly from J.T. Hayes down the family lineage, and John and his brother inherited it right from his father. This collection has been in the family since 1863. So this collection has absolute credible provenance. So it's incredibly difficult to find one authenticated Gettysburg item, but to have all of these items handed down through a family with rock-solid provenance is truly incredible. It's the most complete archive of materials from Gettysburg that I've ever handled. Another pivotal moment in the Civil War at Gettysburg was when Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine defeated Confederate forces at Little Round Top. Chamberlain was protecting the very extreme left flank of the Union forces. The Alabama troops were assaulting his position over and over and over again until Chamberlain's troops were essentially out of ammunition. Chamberlain made the order to fix bayonets, and on the final assault, Chamberlain ordered his men down the hill in a sweeping action to capture the Confederate troops and win the battle. For this, he won the Medal of Honor. There were also a number of bayonets that were in the Hayes collection, and it was interesting kind of going through them. They ranged from like Model 1816 bayonets to saber bayonets to socket bayonets to that Lorenz bayonet. There's just a really interesting variety. And if you don't know what a bayonet is, it is a edged weapon that would be affixed to the end of the gun when you ran out of ammunition or you got into a close quarter combat kind of situation. The bayonet was your friend, and it was one of the most effective and deadly weapons used during the war. Now, there were typically two types of bayonets that were used, a socket bayonet and a saber bayonet. The socket bayonet basically slipped over the muzzle and locked on the front sight. The saber bayonet typically had a handle and a bayonet lug that it fastened on the side of the barrel. And it was a very imposing weapon to look at.
Bayonets like these were carried by our ancestors who put their lives on the line to fight for American liberty. If you want a chance to be one of the few collectors to be able to acquire one of these authenticated bayonets pedigreed to the Battle of Gettysburg from that J.T. Hayes collection, just visit rarecollectiblestv.com and click on the Militaria button at the top of the homepage to take you to the J.T. Hayes collection. Or you can search for your item number in the search bar at the top of the screen. Don't miss out. Visit rarecollectiblestv.com. Now for more incredible stories about the Gettysburg Pedigree J.T. Hayes collection, let's go back to Militaria expert Peter Karlan. With over 30 years experience, Peter has certified Militaria from the most significant periods of American history, including the Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II, and of course, the Civil War. Each of the military relics that Peter shows today has been personally authenticated and certified by him. And now, here's Peter Karlan.
July 3rd, 1863 was probably the most important day during the war. This was the final assault on Union troops by the Confederacy. This is where they tried to take the field, and it would be known as Pickett's Charge. This culminated with the third day of battle, where General Pickett took all of his troops and all of his divisions and all of the Confederate forces and tried to take the field at Gettysburg. The high water mark of the Confederacy is marked in the center of the battlefield under a stand of trees where Pickett's Charge took place. It was the most ferocious fighting, hand-to-hand combat, and severe, severe losses. It was said after the battle, General Robert E. Lee asked Pickett, form your division, and Pickett said, sir, I have no division. It was a tragedy for the South and a pivotal point for the Union. So, yeah, I was really excited about the collection. I became more excited as I started researching it more and looking at the items and then talking to RCTV, and it just kind of took on a life of its own. And one of the most important things about being a collector, an appraiser, a conservator, if you will, a conservator of history, that is making sure that the stories continue on and they're preserved. So here's an opportunity to preserve the story of this collection. Obviously, it's kind of going to get dispersed through the departing of selling the items, but we wanted to make sure that we captured the story and captured all the items in one place to chronicle the story, to keep the story alive, to document the items that were found on the battlefield, and to make sure that those items are preserved for history. The J.T. Hayes collection stands out because of how well documented and pedigreed it is. From the articles in the Emmitsburg Historical Society, to the oral tradition, even to the actual photos of John Hayes holding certain items. This collection is one of the most well documented that I have ever seen. So during the Civil War, revolvers were probably the most effective weapons used in the battlefield, especially in close quarter fighting. So when the infantrymen was issued their musket and their bayonet, the officers would typically have their sword and their pistol, and it was a sign of rank. Now, there were many revolvers and pistols that we found in the collection, but there were few standouts. One pistol found in the collection is the iconic model 1860 Colt Army revolver. Again, this one is war dated. I believe it's 1862 manufactured. It has a wonderful inspector cartouche on the grip, which means that it was issued to the troops prior to the war. And it just has a really, really nice, all-original, untouched look. This was a preferred sidearm for many Union officers. There are also some rarer guns, like an Allen and Wheelock Navy revolver. There was only 750 of these made prior to the Civil War. Now, this one could have seen either side of the war, but that is a really rare gun, and it was really unusual to be found on the battlefield.
Held by the highest-ranking officers during the Battle of Gettysburg, these revolvers helped lead the charge for justice. Do not miss out on your opportunity to add these remarkable relics of American history to your collection. Authentic battle-worn pistols from the Battle of Gettysburg are incredibly rare, and we only have a handful available today. Each of these pistols is one of a kind, so once it's gone, there won't be another one like it. Don't miss this opportunity. Just visit rarecollectiblestv.com and click on the Militaria button at the top of the homepage to take you to the J.T. Hayes collection. Or search for your item number in the search bar at the top of the screen. These items won't last long. Just visit rarecollectiblestv.com. Four and a half months after the Battle of Gettysburg, on November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln gave what has been etched into history as the most important American speech ever given, the Gettysburg Address. In this iconic 271-word speech, Lincoln declared that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth, even after such a tragedy as the Civil War. During the Civil War, we as Americans were tested by the very Constitution that was written by our forefathers during the origins of our country, and liberty and justice prevailed. For this reason, the Civil War has proven time and time again to resonate with us as Americans. It's a reminder that no matter what circumstance has been thrown our way and how difficult it may have been to overcome, we've always found a way to persevere and prosper.
So I've been buying Militaria, antique guns, and all kinds of stuff for over 30 years, and this collection really stood out to me. And it really didn't sink in until I started reading the accounts of J.T. Hayes in the Emmitsburg historical records. And in talking to John Hayes and to looking at the items and to bringing it all together, there is no question in my mind that these items were taken off of the field at Gettysburg, brought down to J.T. Hayes' stoveroom, and traveled through the generations till now. And we're just so happy that we got the collection, and we're pleased to offer it here at Rare Collectibles TV.
This J.T. Hayes collection is truly one of a kind. Historic, documented, authenticated, and featuring some of the most iconic weapons used in the Battle of Gettysburg. Rare, battle-worn artifacts such as these typically land in museums, and this is your unique opportunity to add a valuable and treasured piece of American history to your own personal collection. We at Rare Collectibles TV want to help you carry this torch of liberty and pass the historical legacy of our country down through the generations. I'm Jack McNamara. Thank you for watching.
The preceding was a paid presentation furnished by Rare Collectibles TV, LLC.